right, everyone. Welcome to another amazing episode of the Veteran Entrepreneur Masterclass podcast and YouTube channel. Today's guest is Coastie, a nice Coastie, Don Trone. I've known Don for about 15 years professionally, at least of him, 15 years professionally. However, Don, we spoke last week because have I ever met you before? So I was a little humbled and a little offended there. Like, I guess I'm not very memorable. And I've known about you and what you've done for many years. So Don, good morning. How are you? Welcome.
I'm well, sir. Yourself?
Afternoon for you. So good afternoon for you. Good morning for me.
Yeah. Am I your first Coastie?
You're my second Coastie. My second Coastie. My second Coastie. Second Coastie. Okay. My first Coastie is an actual client too. So we have to get you to be a client too to really bring you up a notch. So we'll work on that. Well, that's actually one of the first questions I ask anyone is, are you a client of mine? So let's just get that out of the way. Are you a client of mine? We already have the answer.
But, before I forget,
sure, because
I know you're always looking for other podcasts. One suggestion would be when we're talking about the universe of Coasties is I can introduce you to Admiral Bob Duncan, who was the admiral that oversaw the Coast Guard's response to Hurricane Katrina.
Oh, wow. That'd be great.
Yeah. Yeah. And he has, you would think there'd be movies and books about this guy. He's been really somewhat quiet about his participation and really hasn't shared a lot of the details with the public.
Sure.
So I've kind of set up, my own goal to try to help him get the word out.
Oh, yeah. That'd be great.
Unbelievable job.
All right.
And then I have another classmate and close friend who oversaw the, what would you call it? He oversaw the BP oil spill. What was that? It's got another name.
Yeah, I remember that's what it was in the Gulf. I don't know what it was.
Yeah. And his story about how he was called in around week 3 because they just couldn't figure out how to cap this thing. And they had the top scientists and engineers from around the world contributing to trying to fix this thing.
Right.
How he brought it all together to finally figure out how to cap it. It's really an amazing story.
Please make those introductions. They'd be 2 great guests to have on the podcast or YouTube channel. So if you are listening, you're a veteran entrepreneur and you're successful in business and you've already gone through the trials, the tribulations of coming out, transitioning, getting a business going, failing, small victory, failing, bigger victory, failing, bigger victory. So now you're kind of on your way. We'd love to have you on the show. We'd love to have you share your wisdom, your knowledge with our community. Anything we can do, or the purpose of this podcast, again, as a refresher, is to help other veterans in business just kick ass. And if you're going to start a company, you have a company, or you've already been out in corporate America for 20 years, and you have that knowledge, you have that wisdom, and you're willing to share it with the community to help other veteran entrepreneurs succeed in their businesses, please reach out, leave a comment, and we'll reach out to anyone, have a conversation. If they're willing to help out, we'll get them on the show and have them contribute to our community. So thanks so much for those 2 ideas, Don. Thank you. Yeah. So real quick, give me your background, just real quick in the Coast Guard, because I want to jump into the businesses you've run and where you're going right now. But just give us your quick professional background when you were in the military. Yeah,
I actually started in the Army. So probably from 4th grade on, I set my mind to going to West Point, went through the congressional appointment process. Number 1 on the list for a long, long time within the congressional district. I think there was 800 within our congressional district going for the one appointment.
Wow.
Memorial Day weekend, that Friday of Memorial Day weekend. So the end of May, West Point calls me and says, not going to happen. We're going to take, it was either number 2 or number 3 on the list, a football player. And they made the right choice. That football player was Dave Rodriguez, who went on to become a 4-star general. And even more amazing than Dave is his son, Andrew Rodriguez. I don't know whether he's still serving in active duty, but as amazing as David was, his son, Andrew, is even more so. So anyhow, West Point called. They apologized. They said, look, if you lived anywhere else in the country, you'd be going. But you're just in a congressional district where Benny. So they said, Tuesday, we want you to go to this recruiting office in the Philadelphia area. They're going to know you're coming in, and we want you to enlist in the infantry. And this is summer of '72, so the Vietnam War is still going on. And they said, there's no guarantees. You're not going to get a contract. We want you to go through boot camp and then advanced infantry training. And then, depending on your record and how things are going, we'll make a determination whether we're going to pull you and put you into the West Point Prep School, which is a program that was started during World War II. It was a way for enlisted men who demonstrated leadership ability on the battlefield, could be taken off the battlefield, set aside for 6 months, 9 months, and then go on to West Point. That program still goes on today. I like to tell the story. When I was at the prep school, we had this tall Polish company commander. Last name was all consonants, could barely fit on his name tag. And so we called him Captain K. You know who that was? Coach K.
For the audience, tell the audience, so the audience may not know who Coach K is.
No, Coach K is the most winningest basketball coach in college history. So the history there, academy graduates have to serve a mandatory 5 years. So the third year, and Coach K is a West Point graduate, class of 69. So his third year of the mandatory obligation was at the prep school.
Nice.
Herding us around. And then the head coach of West Point brought him back up in year 4 to be the assistant basketball coach at West Point. So who was the head coach at West Point at that point?
Not me.
Bobby Knight.
Oh, okay. Wow. Bobby Knight was at okay, cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so when Coach K finished his 5th year, that's when Duke went up to West Point and recruited him to be the head basketball coach at Duke.
Whoops.
So anyhow, I was at the prep school, and I received a presidential appointment, which really entitled me to select any military academy. And I had seen enough of the Army at that point. Again, this is 72 and 73, and those who have served in the Army will reluctantly agree that the morale in the Army at that point was lower than at any time in the history. In fact, the military in general was just on the outs.
Right.
And I saw things, particularly in Vietnam veterans, both enlisted and officers coming back from their Vietnam tour, where if they were 20 years old, they looked like they were 40 years old. It just gutted them.
Right.
And so I was really, as much as I wanted to go to West Point and have the academy experience, I began to question, what am I going to do when I graduate? Am I going to be happy serving as an officer in the Army? And I was questioning that. And then somewhere along the line, somebody gave me a catalog to the Coast Guard Academy. And I remember thumbing through it, and I saw a picture of a Coast Guard helicopter doing a rescue. And I said, that's me.
All right.
Now I can do both. I can get the military experience. I can serve my country. I can serve in a leadership role. More importantly, I can save lives. Instead of wondering whether I can take lives, I'm going to save lives. And that's what I did.
That's cool.
I was president of my class at the Coast Guard Academy. Upon graduation, I did a shipboard tour. Unfortunately, I did not enjoy the shipboard tour. I love being at sea, but it didn't connect. And so I ended up applying to flight school, went to flight school, Pensacola. So the listeners probably don't know this, but at Pensacola, Florida, that is the training base for both the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Coast Guard. So all three branches
for pilots.
Trained together. And we don't split into our respective pipelines until we actually have our gold wings. So that's a neat experience. You get to see what Navy officers are like, and the Marine Corps officers. And, we talked about this in any given week, whether this happens today or not, I don't know. But back then, in any given week, a class would form on Monday, and the class would have 42 officers, 1 Coast Guard officer, 7 Marine Corps officers, and the rest Navy. And because the Coast Guard required its officers to go to sea for 2 years before they could do anything else, the Coast Guard officers typically were the senior man, today it would be man or woman, the senior man in the class. which really rubbed the Marines badly because they're taking orders from a coastie. And, and in turn, but we got along great because in turn we had a common enemy, the Navy.
The Ubers of the Sea is what we like to call them. Uber of the Sea is the Navy for the Marines.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
So I won helicopters, loved it, loved it, loved it. Being a Coast Guard helicopter pilot is like being a special operator in any of the other branches. You know, if you're going to go in the Navy, you go SEALs. Going to go in the Army, go Special Forces, Delta, Ranger. I don't know why anybody would go in the Marines, but if anyhow, you get the idea that you know, if you're going to serve, particularly in the Coast Guard, you want to be a helicopter pilot. Loved it, loved it. Year 8, I also got picked up by law school. So the Coast Guard was going to send me to law school. So I'd be both an aviator and a lawyer and alternate billets, fly. And certain air stations like Miami, Clearwater, Kodiak were big enough that you could also have a lawyer on staff. And so I could double bill it, fly and
ask for double pay, right?
So, absolutely.
Exactly
Plus bonuses, plus commission,
sure, of course.
plus soft dollars.
100%.
Really excited about that. 3 weeks before I was going to start law school, needs of the service. Sorry, we're not sending you to law school. We're sending you to Alaska instead. So with Coast Guard helicopters, Alaskan flying is quite dangerous, quite challenging. And so you have to do a stateside tour before any helicopter pilots can go up to Alaska. And so they were short of Alaskan pilots, went to that. The experience I had was not uncommon. I bet you, I haven't listened to all, your podcasts, but I bet you the number of times you had an officer on your podcast that I got to year 8 and I looked at the next 12 years and I just couldn't see. At year 20, I could see it. I'd be, commanding officer of an air station or, really exciting stuff. But for the next 12 years, it was like.
Seems like an eternity back then too, right? You have no idea that 20 years flew by. And I think all of us now that we have the extra experience would, 20 years would have been nothing, right? But at that time when you're in it, especially even 4, like another 16, can't even imagine it, right? But 8, 12 years so far, it's so much of my life. You're like, it's nothing now.
This is something the military's been dealing with now for, I'm going to say maybe close to 2 decades. So they're trying to make policy changes to make it more, try to keep people that they want to keep in the career.
Well, the pilots
more attractive.
I got out in 2002, so I'll throw that disclaimer out there. But my crew, my friends, most ones that stayed in were pilots, and the government just threw so many bonuses and extra pay and duty station choices that these guys really couldn't get out. So they could, but they'd be giving up so much. So the military shifted, at least when I was in or after I got out. But hearing my friends who stayed in, I have friends who are still flying now. A few are still in. And we were commissioned in 98. So 25 years, a few of my friends are still in on the pilot side. And yes, and I'm just thinking through my mind right now, all my friends, ones who were in the longest were pilots. The government did something to help them.
Yeah, that bonus structure was not there. 86 and 87, it's supply and demand. Everyone wants to be a Coast Guard helicopter. So they don't have to put a bonus out. They don't have to do anything.
Right.
You don't like it?
Right. So let's shift. Let's talk about what you're doing, or let's actually talk about your first endeavor, which you can share as little or as much about as you want, because I think there's some lessons there. You want to talk about your first kind of foray, or I'm thinking FI 360, but if you want to talk about anything before that, when you transitioned and how you kind of got your civilian career going, let's touch base on that briefly.
Yeah, thank you. So when the orders changed, you're not going to law school, you're going to Alaska. And my duty station was Sitka, which in 1985, 86 was, it's a remote island off the Alaskan coast. But 85 and 86, there's no Wi-Fi, there's no satellite, there's no email. It's
out there.
Isolated.
Yeah.
So before going up there, I said, I've mentally prepared myself for another academic challenge, law school. I don't want to just sit up there for a couple years. I'm going to see if I can do a distance learning MBA, master's. And in the mid 80s, there was only 3 universities in the country that offered an extended program. One was the American College, your CLU.
Yep.
In fact, one of the past presidents of the American Society of Life Underwriters, which was the professional society for CLUs, was Don Trone, my father.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I was familiar with the American College. I looked at the courses that would be required. I'm like, well, as you know, we get such lousy pay in the military. Knowing how to manage your finances would make a lot of sense. Can't afford to make a mistake. So I did that. And I immediately found that I loved the subject. I mean, I'd fly search and rescue missions during the day, come home. Kids were young. I'd sit there and study. Got time to write the master's thesis. And I don't know how the subject came up, but I decided to do it on fiduciary responsibility. This is 1985.
Okay. Pioneer back then.
Yeah.
So for those who are listening, what is a fiduciary, Don? So what is a fiduciary and why is that important? And we'll go into more what you're doing now, but just let's get the lay of the land out there. What's a fiduciary and why is that important? What's it mean?
Thank you for reminding me. Our audience is not financial services. It could be, thank you.
No worries.
Fiduciary is a very important subject. It's the legal responsibility you have to manage someone else's assets. So the classic example would be the trustees of a pension plan or the trustees overseeing a foundation endowment, the trustees who oversee our public pension funds. I think they're called directors as opposed to trustees. The Federal Retirement Thrift, which is
your savings plan.
Our fiduciaries. In fact, today we would say there's about 17.5 million investment fiduciaries in our country. 17.5 million. And the 17.5 million are managing about 30% of the nation's liquid investable wealth. So the conduct of fiduciaries has a direct impact on the fiscal health of our nation. If they don't know what they're doing and they screw up their investment decisions, you can cause a lot of harm to society. And a good example of that would be the number of states that have underfunded pension plans. Illinois, I think, probably is in the worst shape. I haven't seen these numbers in the last year or two, but at one point, they were $168 billion in the red. How do you make that up? Well, you either increase taxes or you decrease social services. So if you're teachers, police, firefighters, dog catchers. So that's what we mean. It has a direct impact on the fiscal health of society. So think of the importance of this subject. So in 1985, you know how many books were written on the subject of fiduciary responsibility?
0.
3.
Okay.
Now, how many training programs are on fiduciary? You know the answer to this one, 0. And that's when it hit me. I said, holy cow, if I immersed myself in this subject, could I have a profound impact on the conduct of these millions of investment fiduciaries? And when you think about the importance of managing retirement assets and money in general, it almost is as important as saving a person's actual life. Because if somebody has screwed up their finances, they can be in a terrible position.
Right. For our audience, our listeners out there, just to provide a little clarification, again, a fiduciary, and I act in a fiduciary capacity, and we put in writing, we have a service agreement for our 401k consultant clients where you must put the employee's best interest ahead of your own. And not only that, you have to make sure the company is putting their employees' interests ahead of their own. Example would not be, let's just say a company has a banking relationship with a big national bank. We won't use any names. And that bank then says, hey, well, if you move your retirement plan over here, we'll give you a pricing break there because they make money off the assets. And that would be a prohibited transaction because the company's acting in the company's best interest, not necessarily for the employees. Now, if there's some way to prove that the employees benefited from that at the same time more than the company, it may potentially be okay. But you have to look at all those potential conflicts of interest, which would be a prohibited transaction. So fiduciary must act in the employee's best interest, or your client's best interest must always be ahead of your own, versus a commission broker. A commission broker, it's a transaction, and you get paid for that transaction, and there's no fiduciary liability. It's you own A, I help you facilitate buying A, you bought A, there's a commission involved, they get that commission. It's a transaction, and I've got no liability, no responsibility for the outcome or for my client, whether it was a prudent investment, appropriate investment, the right time, doesn't matter, just a commission, just a trade. So used to be, back in the day, most advisors were acting as commission brokers. That's just how you got paid. The whole system was just built that way. And like, I remember as a brand new financial advisor, the older advisors would call, hey, you got to make the money dance, got to make the money dance. And make the money dance means you're calling your clients, pitching them ideas, because ideas create activity, and activity creates commissions and trades. It's how you make your money. It's how it was back in the day. And then I'd say in the late 90s, early 2000s, really a shift away from transaction and commission business to more fee-based business. And fee-based, that's when you're acting as a fiduciary for your clients, and you're really looking at their overall picture, and you're asking a lot more questions, a lot more details. And it's actually continued. The pendulum has swung, and then it's kind of coming back. But now it's really, the government's really pushing for every advisor to be a fiduciary on everything, and every decision you make for a client should be a fiduciary decision. Is if you're doing this or that. Now they're getting to the point you have to articulate and write down why it's appropriate, why it's in the client's best interest, what you've done, the research you've done, the fee analysis, performance analysis. You have to put all that down. It's almost 10 pages of notes before you can do anything for a client, really. It's come so far with the idea of protecting clients and their investments. Why would you have this? Because people weren't doing their job, and people were taking advantage of clients and hurting clients and making big commissions and not caring about the outcomes for their clients. So unfortunately, because it's fear and greed drives everything, right? Because of a few rotten apples, so to speak, kind of spoils the bunch in our industry. That's why regulation's so hard, so heavy. There's so much regulation. Why every I has to be dotted, every T has to be crossed before you do anything. So if you're listening, it's very important. I can't give legal advice or tax advice, but I'm just going to share. If you're looking for a financial advisor, make sure they articulate their fiduciary process. And so, Don, I think you're going to go back to where this came from, and you helped build the original fiduciary process for more or less the retirement plan industry, which is 401ks, profit sharing, pension plans. So back to you after that slight pontification, edification, and clarification.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. So, yeah, I want to now be more inclusive of your audience. As I was transitioning from active duty, well, first of all, I wrote my theses, master's theses, while I was still on active duty. And the title of that master's thesis is How to Integrate a Fiduciary Standard into an Investment Advisory Practice. So again, this is 1985. What I was looking for when I transitioned from active duty to Wall Street, probably just being naive, but I was anticipating that I would see the same level of professionalism in Wall Street that I saw in the Coast Guard, which is pretty naive when you think about it. I mean, I was in a community of men and women, Coast Guard pilots, search and rescue helicopter pilots, who risk their lives every day to save complete strangers and don't get paid any more or less when they do so. So I went from that, and more importantly, and this is true of any military pilot and probably any specialty within the military does do an outstanding job of giving you checklists and training, extensive training to properly execute those checklists. In 1987, when I finally left active duty and joined Wall Street, checklists and training did not exist. Exactly what you talked about. It was a sales mentality. That became my sense of purpose. I was bound and determined that I was going to make a profession out of financial services. First of all, my master's thesis got circulated. Again, I wrote it for the American College. They shared it with other financial services firms. Raymond James was the first who called and said, hey, we like this thesis. Would you like to come and be the head of investment advisory services for all of Raymond James?
Wow.
Pretty cool. One day you're a Coast Guard helicopter pilot. Next day you're the, And what I found was the number of men and women that, in my opinion, were extremely professional. I mean, they really did want to act in the best interest of their clients. They just didn't have a guidebook.
Right.
They didn't have, practices to go by. They didn't have any encouragement. The other thing I would add, because you just said a minute ago, ask your potential advisor if they'll be a fiduciary. The problem with that today is even dirtbags are willing to say, I'm a fiduciary and I'll sign off on it. So my advice to people today, particularly for your audiences,
please.
Would you consider this potential advisor as a critical leader in your life? And if the answer is no, I don't see that, you have the wrong advisor. That's the easiest way to tell whether you've got the right person, whether you're working with the right person or not. So very quickly, I'm not going to name all the firms. So I went through 3 significant financial services firms, a lot of great people, but all these major financial services firms were struggling with fiduciary responsibility. And so that's when I said, I'm going to have to start my own firm. And that's when I started FI360. FI360 was a combination of training on fiduciary responsibility, but also technology to support the training. Not the training itself, but what we were saying you needed to do. For example, one of the critical things is you have to, like you just said, you have to demonstrate the due diligence process you went through in selecting investment options. So I built the first generation of what we now call fintech or financial technology to do that. And it was even cloud-based, except we didn't even know what the word cloud-based was.
Right.
We were way out there. And we ended up publishing the first handbook on fiduciary best practices. We went to Washington, D.C. to show the SEC and the Department of Labor what we were doing. This is in 2001. Neither federal agency had an interest until October 15th of 2001, Enron. Enron is the seminal event that put fiduciary on the front page. And I remember the day that Enron broke. My parents called me. And again, remember, my father was president of the American Society.
Right.
And they called and they said, we never understood what the hell you were trying to do with your career, but now we get it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So talk through that. Like talk about FI360, kind of setting it up and like the challenges you had. There was nothing there, and building something and not having an audience, kind of being ahead of the tide, so to speak, where no one really recognizes it. What challenges did you face there?
Well, the challenge was denial by the industry. The industry was not supportive whatsoever. Not at all. There was just individuals, early adopters of fiduciary standards that would come through the training, but no enterprises, no organizations. As a word of advice to your listeners, particularly those who are entrepreneurs and starting their own companies, the fatal mistake I made was I did not do enough due diligence on the potential investor that we accepted money from. When I started FI360, I affiliated with the University of Pittsburgh. I wanted to have an academic. And the university came to me and said, one of our major donors is interested in your company and wants to invest. One of the criteria is you have to take the son-in-law as your CFO. And then Ernst & Young called and said, this is one of our major clients. We just wanted to validate this is a good investor. Okay. I stopped there. I didn't dig deeper. Took the money in and probably within hours realized it was a huge mistake. It was a total disconnect. The family was incredibly dysfunctional. It was its idea of spending its wealth was spending it on litigation, not on vacation homes, not on, it was on litigation. They sued the businesses they were invested in. If they didn't have a lawsuit there, they would sue one another. Literally, they would sue one another. So anyhow, before you take money from an investor, see if there's a track record of litigation. Because if there is,
that's a huge lesson right there. So if you're in the audience, let's take a minute and chat about that. If you're trying to grow, you're trying to scale, the idea of accepting outside investors sounds appealing. And there's different ways of doing it. But what you just mentioned is huge because you went through it. You want to make sure it feels good, right? Getting money in. Actually, I'll share. I've never taken money from an outside investor. Everything, my business is self-made. However, there are businesses all the time that take outside investors. And I think you shared, and you're just so happy to get an investor. Like someone wants to invest in your business. There's money. Someone actually wants to give me money for this idea for a business to grow and build, and then realize you may be doing a deal with the devil.
What's going through your mind is you personally know your level of integrity and professionalism. And in my mind, I'm like, I'm not worried. I will never do anything wrong. I will be the best investment this family ever made. Unfortunately, if you've got mental health issues with your investor, it does not matter. In fact, I'm not a psychiatrist, obviously, but there are some mental illnesses that the more you try to placate somebody, the meaner they get. What happened was by 2007, I'm not going to go into all the gory details, but the son-in-law admitted to taking $170,000 out of the company without authorization. And before any action could be taken, father-in-law came in with lawyers and got control of the board, my board, and got rid of me. Now, you could say, well, weren't you the largest shareholder? Yes, I was the largest shareholder, more than 51% of the stock. But guess what? If you don't have the money to defend yourself in court for the next 5 years, it doesn't matter what percentage of shares you. It does not matter. Because what shocked me when the family said, sat down and said, we want to make this contribution, we want to invest in you. I thought they were going to ask for a big percentage. They didn't. It was a relatively reasonable amount. And I thought I was really fortunate. Now I know it didn't matter what percentage they had. They could have had one share. And that's what your listeners need done. If an investor has one share and they have more money than you to spend on lawyers, you're in trouble.
It's huge.
You don't know it yet, but you're in trouble. And that's what happened. I ended up in an 8-year legal battle. And the family knew this. They took everything, retirement accounts, house, savings, everything. That's just the way they were. So I had to start over from scratch. But I still haven't abandoned the sense of purpose. I mean, today we're still. Now, what's different today, though, is beginning with the hostile takeover of FI 360, it was becoming clear that fiduciary was deteriorating. It was being overcome by politics, power, ego, and greed. Any worthwhile endeavor in society eventually is going to decay from politics, power, ego, and greed. So I was struggling with that. And things being the way it is, 48 hours after this hostile takeover, the Coast Guard calls me. Actually, Coast Guard Academy. We got funding to create a leadership think tank at the Coast Guard Academy. We're looking for the right person to come in and stand up this new endeavor. Yeah, we got lots of retired admirals, lots of retired captains. They don't know how to start a business. They don't know how to start something from scratch and build it up. You have the Coast Guard experience. You've got the entrepreneur. You've got the building. Would you consider coming back in? It just so happens.
Yeah, it's like mildly decent timing there. I like that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I also knew, in fact, my attorney said, you're going to end up in court for 5 years. The track record of this family is they're just going to destroy you. So you might as well go and do something else for a period of time, because there's nothing you can do. You have lost your company. You are not going to win. Just get that in your head. It is gone. So I'm like, okay, we'll do that. And the other thing that went through my mind when Coast Guard called was, we have never looked at the leadership behaviors that are essential for the fiduciary. So I shared that with the Coast Guard. I said, look, I'd be willing to bet that when I do this, by the way, the event that triggered all this was Katrina, which was 2005. Coast Guard, first 9 days of Hurricane Katrina, the Coast Guard rescued 24,500 people. Put that in perspective, in an average year, we rescued 5,500. In 9 days, we rescued 24,500. And no other government agency put up anything near that kind of response. So Congress wanted to know, what's the secret to the Coast Guard's success in building leaders? That's blah, blah, blah. So now 2007, lots going on, blah, 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 blah. Bottom line is, what I found out with Katrina was I was looking for a framework that would link leadership with decision-making. Just any framework, military, civilian, doesn't make a framework that links leadership with decision-making. So I have an inventory of leadership behaviors. I have a defined decision-making process. I want to integrate the two together.
Okay.
It was fiduciary all over again. There wasn't a framework. It was the most obvious thing in the world. You got to be kidding me. No one's ever built a framework to do that. So I went to Coast Guard officials, told them what I found. They said, we have no idea what you're talking about. Even if we did, we wouldn't know what to do with it. Go ahead and start a company if you think there's potential in this research. Did that. That's the company 3 Ethos, which still exists today. I added stewardship to the framework. So now it's leadership, stewardship, governance. West Point heard about what I was doing. They were greatly offended that this great idea was come up by Coast Guard. I mean, like they would be swearing on the phone, like, how the hell, I can't even repeat the words.
Yeah.
So I ended up teaching a 3-day leadership boot camp at West Point for Wall Street executives. And what I would say to your listeners, if you ever get a chance to go through a training program through Thayer, it just goes by the name Thayer today, but it's really the Thayer Leader Development Group.
Thayer, okay.
Do so. It's an incredible experience. If you're going to study leadership and effective decision-making, there is no better place on the planet than to do so at West Point. And particularly for the Wall Street executives, where the whole emphasis is, like you said, what was the term you used? Make the money dance, or
make the money dance. Yeah, the old advisors used to say. I remember one particular advisor, you got to make the money dance. Got to make the money dance.
Got to make the money dance. That all goes away when you're sitting there learning about leadership and you see an 18-year-old in uniform who's already dedicated their life to their service of their country. It made the Wall Street executives feel that big. So I ended up becoming very good friends with the head of leadership development at West Point. At that point, it was Colonel Sean Hanna. 2015, he came to me and said, look, I'm leading an academic team that has published research in neuro-leadership. This is the team. It's world-famous research now. This is the team that proved there is such a thing as a natural-born leader, that an exemplary leader has a different brain mapping, hotspots in the brain than the rest of us. And we saw this in the military all the time, too. I mean, we're all going through the same training program. We all have the same experiences. And some men and women just
get it. Yeah.
get it, and others, no matter how much training and remediation they go through, they never get it.
Right.
So he said, look, your leadership, stewardship, governance framework, we can validate it with this research. So we became partners. That research today is called behavioral governance. Sean now is a full tenured professor at Wake Forest University. He is ranked for the third year in a row. He's ranked in the top 1% of academic and scientific researchers in the world across all disciplines. So this body of research, behavioral governance, really, really, really has significant potential. And we're now, mining, trying to put together the businesses to really take advantage of that. As it relates to your listeners, it's very simple, and that is behavioral governance is the interrelationship between leadership, stewardship, and governance. And it sounds obvious, but the research was never done in this area. And that is the quality of your leadership and stewardship is going to have a direct impact on the quality of your decision-making outcomes. So back to your world, our world of the financial advisor, you talk about collecting all the information and all that stuff and blah, 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 blah. The real key, though, of the quality of investment advice, yes, you have to gather all that information, but the real key that's going to determine the quality of that investment advice are the leadership and stewardship behaviors of the advisor. If the advisor is a dirtbag at some point in time, hope never happens, that your investment portfolio will come apart.
Well, that's
where we are today.
So bringing that together, bringing that home, and that I would share, if you want to know if your advisor has any tendencies there, go to FINRA Broker Check, right? FINRA Broker Check, if you've ever had your advisors had a complaint against them, it's listed. It's public information. Knock on wood. I've had my licenses for almost 20 years, 19 years, and I have zero complaints, so my record's clean. I like to keep it that way, but you can check me out on FINRABrokerCheck.com, Brett Henderson, and so Don, bring it all together. So we've been chatting for 45 minutes, and I know you've got something else where your next endeavor is going, but why don't you just bring it home for us? Bring it all together. If you're a veteran entrepreneur, you're listening, checklist procedures are huge. Also, make sure if you're going to take outside investment that you vet that outside investor before you do. And realize, I think a phenomenal lesson too, if you got someone they want to take over and they got more money than you, be careful, right? And so how would you like to kind of bring this home, Don? I know you're doing something new now that you want to maybe share, maybe save that. I don't know. I'll let you bring it home.
When we get off this call, I'm going to send you a slide deck on behavioral governance. Literally today. So the deck I'm going to show you has not been edited. So it's going to have, I'm a helicopter pilot. I'll have misspellings.
Okay. I'm a tanker. I can't spell either, so it's fine.
Well, tankers can't even put a complete sentence together.
It's true, very true.
Yeah. The deck I'm going to share with you is an M&A due diligence process based on behavioral governance. Now, your listeners might be saying, well, M&A is something that will happen 10 years from now when I'm ready to sell my company. The point is that on day one, you want to start preparing for your exit strategy. Related to that, when you look at the checklist, what it's assessing is, do you have the right leadership behaviors? Do you have the right stewardship behaviors? By the way, the difference between those two terms, leadership is your capacity to inspire and engage others. Stewardship is your passion and discipline to protect the long-term interests of others.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah. Governance is your ability to manage the details of a prudent decision-making process. What's important for your listeners to know, those words I just used are completely universal. I'm going to give them to them again, but it's completely universal. So no matter what industry your listeners are in, it does not matter. Military, civilian, not-for-profit. I don't care if you're in a cult. Leadership is your capacity to inspire and engage. Stewardship is your passion and discipline to protect those you serve. Governance is your ability to manage a prudent decision-making process. Now, what I just defined using plain English was the term fiduciary without using any legalese or regulatory or compliance terms, and it's completely universal. So the slide deck is going to have this universal process for assessing your leadership, assessing your stewardship, and a checklist to make sure you're following a prudent decision-making process.
And that can be applied to any industry. I like it.
Any industry.
So Don, if someone's to get a hold of that checklist, or when it's ready to be distributed to the public, how does someone find you, your company, reach out to you, connect with you? Don, here's your time to shine. Give yourself a plug.
Yeah. It's easy. It's Don, D-O-N, at 3, numeric 3, ethos, Echo Tango Hotel Oscar Sierra.com.
So Don at 3 ethos. Don at 3ethos.com.
Yeah. And your military listeners all are familiar with the term ethos. Okay. What they probably don't know is ethos is an ancient Greek term. I'm going to give a modern translation.
Go for it.
But an ancient Greek term that means it's a continuum of your core values, behavior, and decision-making process.
You live it. That's your altruistic mission. You live it. You breathe it. Your mindset, your values, your integrity are now in your business. So your business is you. You are your business, and you've taken that career of trying to help others and build processes, which you learn the foundations from the military checklist, SOPs. Now it's applied to any business. And I love it. You were chatting about the exit strategy. So one of my other designations is the CEPA, if you see that below, is Certified Exit Planning Advisor. And that same thing, you're running your business. The sooner you start running your business as though you're going to sell your business, is the sooner your business starts doing better, because all the processes, procedures, steps, documentation to run a business and to sell a business, if you're doing it from day one, your business is just going to be that much better. So it's not just for selling the business, it's for just running the business as efficiently as possible. Don, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. This has been amazing. I'd love to see what happens in the next 6 months or so as you get your business up and running, or this new deck developed and out in corporate America. So maybe have you back in 6 months and go through that. This has been a phenomenal episode. Thanks so much, everyone, to check me out. I am Brett Henderson, the Veteran Entrepreneur Masterclass podcast. Thanks so much for being here. If you have questions, thoughts, ideas for speakers, please drop a comment below. And then this is sponsored by my own firm, which is Strategic Wealth Endeavor. We do wealth management and business consulting for veteran entrepreneurs. So I'm Brett. Don, thanks so much for being here. Everyone, we'll talk to you soon.